So there's a new report out from the Associated Press. Now it turns out that Paul Manafort had some interesting connections with certain Russian billionaires. Oh, fascinating. So this is a Russia story, okay? So look, we already found out that he had some ties and did some work for the Ukrainians. Now, we actually have some, information in this story to go along with that as well. Now, according to this new report, Manafort, Trump's former campaign chairman, secretly worked for a Russian billionaire nearly a decade ago, in 2005. Now, before you think, okay, and why does this matter? Why is this relevant? Well, let me break it down. Now, he reportedly worked to advance the interests of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Oh, so this is the AP saying this, right? And according to some of these documents that they had obtained, had an ambitious political strategy to undermine anti-Russian opposition in places like Ukraine and inside of Russia. Well, very interesting. So the AP is saying that Manafort worked for this billionaire, had ties to Putin to do things that were beneficial to Putin. Interesting. Now, look, there's an overall theme of this, right? Where this could be considered criminal, and I'll get to that as well. Now, part of that is basically the fact that this contradicts assertions by the Trump administration and Paul Manafort himself that he had never worked for anyone tied to Russian interests. Well, that would be probably the third person, somewhere around the third person, maybe more, who has lied about having any sort of contact with the Russians. First you had Michael Flynn, then you had Jeff Sessions, and now Paul Manafort saying, Russians? No, I didn't work for the Russians. I didn't work with anyone associated with the Russians. Really? Interesting. So what did Manafort do? Well, according to this report, Manafort proposed in a confidential strategy plan as early as June 2005, according to the documents obtained by the Associated Press, that he would influence politics, business dealings, and news coverage inside the United States, Europe, and the former Soviet republics to benefit this billionaire and ultimately the Putin administration. Interesting. Now, Manafort pitched the plans to Russian aluminum magnate Oleg Deripaska. So this guy is that shady, that billionaire. He's a aluminum magnate. I almost said magnet. So just be proud of me that I didn't do that. But it was close. Now, Deripaska is a close Putin ally with whom Manafort had eventually signed a $10 million annual contract beginning in 2006. Now, again, these documents show wire transfers between Deripaska and Paul Manafort. So we have evidence here that he was working for Deripaska. Okay, again, that's not really the illegal part. Okay, he can work for whoever he wants, that's fine. Now, according to interviews with several people familiar with payments to Manafort and business records obtained by the Associated Press, Manafort and Deripaska maintained a business relationship until at least 2009, according to one person familiar with the work. Now, in this strategy plan, Manafort writes, quote, "We are now of the belief that this model that they came up with can greatly benefit the Putin government if employed at the correct levels with appropriate commitment to success. The effort," Manafort wrote, "will be offering a great service that can refocus both internally and externally the policies of the Putin government." So let's kind of break that apart. So in this memo, he says, yes, I'm working for a Russian billionaire. This Russian billionaire is an ally of Putin that wants to help refocus the policies of the Putin government and essentially lobby on behalf of the Putin government with other nations. Okay. So now, of course, it's not just the United States. It's former Soviet states like Kazakhstan and Ukraine, who Manafort also worked for. Now, remember, when this was happening, this was during the Bush administration. Now, during that time, our relationship with the Russian government wasn't great, and it's not great now. Okay. Now, That is, of course, despite George W. Bush famously saying, "Oh, I looked into his eyes, I looked into his soul, and Putin is a wonderful man." Yeah, okay. Yeah, I kind of sounded a bit more like Lindsey Graham than George W. Bush, but you get the point. Now, Manafort's plans were laid out in these documents that were obtained, again, by the Associated Press, that included strategy memoranda and records showing international wire transfers for millions of dollars. Now, how much work Manafort had performed under the contract was unclear. Now, of course, Manafort has dismissed the investigations as a political witch hunt and misguided, saying, "Hey, man, I never worked for Russian interests. I worked for this billionaire, and we did business." Okay. But, see, if he had done so, which he did, according to these documents, well, it would have been nice to know. See, what they did, what he was doing as a lobbyist, remember, he's a lobbyist for this Russian interest. That essentially means you are going and bribing politicians. Or, well, not bribing politicians. That's heavy, okay? We don't have to prove that. Basically, you were lobbying these politicians. You are saying, "Hey, you know what? You know what's great? This Russian guy that sells aluminum, maybe you would like to do some contracts. He's a friend of mine, and he's got some good contracts. You should probably sign up with him, maybe do some importation, make him some money." Okay. Now, that's essentially doing propaganda. Now, he got paid $10 million a year to do that. So, what's the big deal here? Well, the big deal is that he lied about it. In a statement to the AP, Manafort confirmed that he worked for Deripaska in various countries, but said the work was being fairly uncast as inappropriate or nefarious as part of a smear campaign. Now, look, lobbying, not really nefarious. We don't like it. I certainly don't like lobbying. But okay, look, it seemed that there would be nothing illegal about the act of lobbying itself, right? Now, the thing about it is that, well, he didn't register as a lobbyist. That's a bit of a problem. I'll get to that. Now, he said, quote, "I worked with Oleg Deripaska almost a decade ago, representing him on business and personal matters in countries where he had investments. My work for Mr. Deripaska did not involve representing Russia's political interests." So let's go back to what Manafort wrote in these memos. Quote, "We are now of the belief that this model can greatly benefit the Putin government if employed at the correct levels with the appropriate commitment to success." Hey, you wrote that. I didn't write that. The AP didn't write that. You wrote that. Okay. Are you saying that you either didn't mean that or you were lying to Deripaska? I'm sure that he would like to know, as he is currently kind of angry at you. But I'll get to that. Now, who is this guy? Who is this Russian aluminum magnate? Deripaska became one of Russia's wealthiest men under Putin, buying assets abroad in ways widely perceived to benefit the Kremlin's interests. U.S. diplomatic cables from 2006 described Deripaska as among the 2 to 3 oligarchs Putin turns to on a regular basis, and more or less a permanent fixture on Putin's trips abroad. So they're very close. They're very buddy-buddy. All right, fascinating. Now, in response to questions about Manafort's consulting firm, a spokesman for Deripaska in 2008, at least 3 years after they began working together, said Deripaska had never hired his lobbying firm. Very interesting, because that part's actually true. He did not hire the lobbying firm, but he hired Manafort himself. Very, very important distinction here. Now, another Deripaska spokesman in Moscow last week declined to answer the Associated Press's questions. So again, that's kind of weird. We have documents that confirmed that Manafort had worked for Deripaska. There was money exchanged. However, I guess he's right when he says, well, his lobbying firm never worked for me. Well, okay, we're not asking about the lobbying firm. Did Manafort ever work for you? Now, if you can remember, this isn't the first time Manafort has been linked to a pro-Putin lobbying operation. The AP found that Manafort had orchestrated a covert Washington lobbying operation until 2014 on behalf of Ukraine's ruling pro-Russian political party. These obtained business records link Manafort more directly to Putin's interest in the region. According to those records and people with direct knowledge of Manafort's work for Deripaska, Manafort made plans to open an office in Moscow. And at least some of Manafort's work in Ukraine was directed by Deripaska, not local political interests. Now, it's important to note as well that that Moscow office never actually opened. All right, so there's that. Now, not only that, but back in 2005, Manafort told Deripaska that he was pushing policies as part of his work in Ukraine. Quote, at the highest levels of the U.S. government, the White House, Capitol Hill, and the State Department, according to the documents. He also said that he had hired a leading international law firm with close ties to President Bush to support our client's interests. But he did not identify the firm. Manafort also said that he was employing an unidentified legal experts for the effort at leading universities and think tanks, including Duke, New York University, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Manafort, however, did not disclose details about the lobbying work to the Justice Department during the period the contract was in place. So he lobbied for you in Ukraine. Again, nothing illegal unless you don't report it. And that is the issue here. He was not open about his relationship with this billionaire who happened to be part of Russia's inner circle. And this is under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. People who lobby in the U.S. on behalf of foreign political leaders or political parties must provide detailed reports about their actions to the State Department. Willfully failing to register is a felony and can result to up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. So, if that is true, that he ended up lobbying on behalf of this Russian oligarch to advance Russia's political interests, that is a bit of a problem. Especially since he's like, oh no, I didn't lie. No, I didn't work for Russia. I didn't work for Putin, except when he said that my plan here will help Putin. Oops. Uh-oh. Now, again, how much Deripaska had paid Manafort in total, not clear. We don't know the numbers on that. But people familiar with the relationship said money transfers to Manafort amounted to tens of millions of dollars and had continued through at least 2009. Now, so what was the ultimate aim of this? Was it to overthrow the government or to hack the elections in favor of a Russian candidate? No. What you got to understand is that, like everything, this comes down to the money. You got to follow the money, right? In strategy memos, Manafort proposed that Deripaska and Putin would benefit from lobbying these Western governments, especially in the United States, to allow oligarchs to keep possession of formerly state-owned assets in places like Ukraine. He proposed building long-term relationships with Western journalists and a variety of measures to improve recruitment, communications, and financial planning by pro-Russian parties in the region. Manafort also proposed extending his existing work in Eastern Europe to Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Georgia, where he pledged to bolster the legitimacy of governments friendly to Putin and undercut anti-Russian figures through political campaigns, nonprofit front groups, and media or operations. Now, for his $10 million contract, Manafort did not use his consulting firm, Davis Manafort. Instead, he used a different company, LOAV Ltd., that he had registered in Delaware in 1992. So here's some interesting facts about LOAV Ltd. He listed that company as having the same address as his lobbying consulting firm in Alexandria, Virginia. Now, in other records, however, LOAV's address was listed at Paul Manafort's home, also in Alexandria. Now, Manafort sold this home back in July 2015 for $1.4 million and now owns an apartment in Trump Tower. Now, Manafort's work, according to these documents, continued with Deripaska for years, though they had recently had a falling out in 2014 in a Cayman Islands bankruptcy court. Now, the billionaire gave Manafort nearly $19 million to invest in a Ukrainian TV company called Black Sea Cable. According to legal filings by Deripaska's representatives, it is said that after taking the money, Manafort and his associates stopped responding to Deripaska's queries about how the funds were being used. Interesting. Now, early it gets really fascinating here. Early in the 2016 campaign, Deripaska's representatives openly accused Manafort of fraud and pledged to recover the money from him. However, after Donald Trump earned the Republican nomination, he became the nominee, Deripaska's representatives said they were no longer interested in discussing this case. That is curious. Doesn't that get you to ask some questions? Like perhaps maybe somebody intervened on Manafort's behalf with this Russian billionaire. Look, none of this is definitive proof that Trump had anything to do with this. Let's be fair. However, it does seem to go along with what we found with people who are around Donald Trump in his orbit having Russian ties. Very interesting. And it does kind of make you think, doesn't it? Now, for me personally, I don't think this is a coincidence. Now, what this does not mean, and let me be very clear, is that we should not be fear-mongering and gearing up for any sort of conflict with Russia. I'm not interested in war. Nobody's interested in war, except for the defense contractors and some in the corporate media. Not at all interested in going to war with Russia. So again, let's stop the fear-mongering. Let's stop calling this, saying that the Russians they hacked our elections is an act of war. Ridiculous. That kind of rhetoric does not help whatsoever. This also doesn't mean that every accusation against Putin is 100% correct. Doesn't mean they hacked the election, etc. Right? None of that. What it does mean is that it seems like there are financial interests between many former and current prominent Trump staffers, people in the Trump inner circle, and Vladimir Putin and other Russian oligarchs. Again, this is an issue about following the money. You got to look at the money. Money talks, bullshit walks, right? Now, what came out of those financial interests remains to be seen. But we do know that this current administration does stand to benefit Putin economically. For example, more fossil fuels. Well, just so happens that Russia is a petrol state. They have lots of natural gas exports. They have lots of oil. Their economy is partly based on these exports. Well, we know the Obama administration, and by extension the Clinton administration, would not have been friendly with these climate policies, for example, to reduce emissions, as well as sanctions on Russia for what happened over in Ukraine. Well, put in by the Obama administration, likely continued by the Clinton administration, would have hurt Russia's economy. Well, Rex Tillerson, who is now Secretary of State, he's like, oh, well, I worked for ExxonMobil. I negotiated a $500 million deal with Russia to export oil. We kind of would like that deal. It would be kind of good for us economically. It would also be economically good for Putin. So that's what we know. That's why it kind of matters. That's why we need to continue to investigate these things. Now, again, is there a deal between Putin and Trump? I don't know. We don't have any information on that. But my personal feeling, and you could say, oh, come on, Jeff, you're fear-mongering. You're totally wrong. Russia, Russia, Russia. I might be wrong. I might be wrong. But just I have a personal feeling that there is some sort of economic deal between both, again, Putin and Donald Trump. That's why we investigate. This is why we investigate. This is why we look into these things. This is why we talk about these things. And again, it's not just deals with Putin and Trump, possible deals. Donald Trump loves anybody who gives him money, who makes any sort of deal with him, whether it be Russia, whether it be Saudi Arabia, which again, Donald Trump has investments in these countries. Why do you think they're not on the travel ban? It all comes down to money. It all comes down to doing business deals. You got to follow the money. And when you do, you end up in some very interesting places. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.